Chapter 1. The Inheritance of Shadows. The letter had arrived 3 days after Margaret buried her husband with borrowed money, and a heart hollowed out by grief that tasted more like relief than sorrow. You are sole heir to the estate of Cornelius Ashford, located at Ravenmere Lake. Come at once. Margaret had never heard of Cornelius Ashford, had no family she knew of beyond Thomas, and he was ash now, scattered in a pauper's grave because his gambling debts had consumed everything. Their savings, her dignity, the small apartment that had never quite felt like home. She had nothing, less than nothing. The creditors would come soon, and Margaret had learned that a widow with no money and no connections was little more than a ghost in London's eyes. So she'd taken the train north, watching the city give way to wilderness, civilization thinning until only forest remained. The solicitor's instructions led her to a village so small it barely warranted a name, and from there, a carriage that wound through trees that seemed to lean in too close, their branches skeletal against a sky-threatening snow. The house appeared like a vision from a fever dream. It rose from the shore of a lake so still it looked like black glass, reflecting clouds heavy with unspent storms, Gothic architecture and gray stone, towers and turrets and narrow windows that reminded Margaret of watching eyes. Ivy covered half the structure, dead now in late autumn, brown tendrils clinging like desperate fingers. It was beautiful, terrible, wrong, in ways she couldn't articulate. The carriage driver refused to take her closer than the iron. Gates, I'll come back in 3 days, he said, his accent thick with local dialect. If you're still alive. Margaret wanted to laugh at the melodrama. Instead, she felt ice settle in her stomach. What do you mean? But the driver was already turning the horses, leaving her alone with a single trunk of belongings and a house that seemed to breathe. The gates opened at her touch, unlocked, waiting. The path to the front door was overgrown but navigable, weeds pushing through cobblestones. Margaret's breath misted in the cold air as she climbed the steps, her worn boots clicking against stone. The door opened before she could knock. A man stood in the doorway, and Margaret's first thought was that he was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Her second thought was that beauty like that didn't exist in living things. He was tall, lean, dressed in clothing at least a century out of fashion, dark velvet and silver buttons, a high collar that emphasized the sharp planes of his face. His hair was black as the lake, falling past his shoulders. But it was his eyes that stole her breath, pale gray, almost silver, too bright to be natural. Mrs. Thorne, he said, his voice like smoke and old wine. You're late. Margaret clutched her trunk handle tighter. I'm sorry. The train was delayed and the carriage... She stopped. How do you know my name? I know everything about you, Margaret. He stepped aside, gesturing into the house with a grace that seemed choreographed. Your husband's debts, your circumstances, the fact that you have nowhere else to go. Come inside. We have much to discuss. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the November wind cut through her thin coat, and she had 3 pounds to her name, and nowhere in London that would take her without references or coin. Margaret stepped across the threshold. The entrance hall was vast, vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, a grand staircase splitting in 2 directions, furniture covered in dust sheets that made them look like ghosts waiting to wake. Candles burned in wall sconces despite the early hour, their light warm but insufficient against the darkness that seemed to pool in every corner. Who are you? Margaret asked, setting down her trunk. Are you the solicitor? The estate manager? I am neither. The man moved deeper into the house with fluid, predatory grace. I am Adrian Ashford. This house is mine as it has been for 200 years. And you, Margaret Thorne, are the answer to a problem I've been trying to solve for far too long. 200 years. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Margaret's laugh was sharp, brittle. That's impossible. No one lives 200 years. No one human. He turned to face her, and in the candlelight his eyes seemed to glow. But I stopped being human in 1654. The night house corvus turned me against my will and bound me to this place with blood oaths I cannot break. The room tilted. Margaret grabbed the stair railing to steady herself. You're mad. I'm a vampire. Adrian said it simply, as if commenting on the weather. And you're my descendant, not by blood, but by marriage. Your husband's family traces back to my mortal line, which makes you, by the ancient laws of house inheritance, The heir to Ravenmere, Margaret stared at him, cataloging evidence her rational mind tried to dismiss. The too pale skin, the stillness that suggested he wasn't breathing, the way shadows seemed to cling to him like loyal dogs. "Vampires aren't real," she whispered. "Tell that to the houses that rule the night." Adrian moved closer, not threatening but inexorable. "There are 4 great vampire houses in Britain: Corvus, Thorn, Dragon, and Vesper. Each controls territory, maintains laws, and guards their own. I belonged to House Corvus once. Now I belong to no one. I'm trapped here by a blood curse that requires a mortal heir to break. And you think that's me? I know it's you." He stopped an arm's length away. "The curse is specific. Only a willing heir of the Ashford line can dissolve the bonds. You inherit this house, its lands, its wealth. All I ask in exchange is your consent to one ritual. An hour of your time, freely given, to break 2 centuries of imprisonment." Margaret's mind raced. This was insanity. Vampires and curses and ancient houses. She should leave, walk back to the village, beg passage back to London. But London had nothing for her. Just debt collectors and pitying looks and the slow starvation of trying to survive without means or mercy. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked. Adrian's smile was sad. "Then I remain here, and you own a house you cannot sell or leave without triggering clauses in Cornelius's will that would see it, and its wealth, revert to House Corvus. They've been waiting decades for an heir to appear and fail. They'll devour you, Margaret, slowly and legally, until you have even less than you do now. And if I agree, if I help you break this curse, then you're free. The house and fortune are yours to do with as you wish. I leave, resume my place in the world, and you never see me again." He paused. "Unless you choose otherwise." The implications in those last words made her pulse quicken. Margaret looked around the entrance hall, at the wealth implied by even this neglected space, at the promise of safety from creditors and starvation, at the vampire who watched her with eyes too ancient for his beautiful face. "I want to see the contract," she said finally. "The will, the terms, everything in writing." Adrian's smile widened, and she saw the hint of fangs. "Clever woman. Come." He led her deeper into the house, and Margaret followed, knowing she was stepping off a cliff into darkness. But she'd been falling since Thomas died. At least now, she'd choose how she landed. Chapter 2. The contract written in blood. Adrian led Margaret through corridors that seemed to twist deeper into the house than the exterior suggested possible. The walls were lined with portraits, pale faces in antique clothing, all with those same unsettling silver eyes. Some paintings were so old the canvas had darkened with age, but the eyes remained luminous, as if the subjects watched her passage with predatory interest. "Your family?" Margaret asked, her voice echoing strangely in the narrow hallway. "House Corvus." Adrian's tone carried centuries of bitterness. "The family that made me, and then discarded me when I refused to follow their more distasteful practices." "What practices?" He paused before an ornate door, his hand on the tarnished brass handle. "Feeding without consent, turning humans against their will, using mortals as pawns in house politics." His eyes met hers. "I was young when they turned me, believed their promises of power and eternal life. By the time I understood what they truly were, I was already bound by blood oaths I couldn't break." Adrian opened the door to reveal a library that stole Margaret's breath. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, leather-bound volumes in languages she couldn't read. A massive desk dominated the center, covered in papers and maps. But it was the windows that captured her attention. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Black Lake, framed by heavy velvet curtains the color of old blood. "This is where Cornelius worked," Adrian said, moving to the desk. "Your distant cousin by marriage. A scholar who studied vampire law, trying to find loopholes in the curse that bound me here. He died 3 months ago. Heart failure. Very human, very final." Margaret heard grief beneath his words. "You cared for him." "He was the first mortal in a century who looked at me and saw a person rather than a monster." Adrian's fingers traced the edge of the desk. "He promised he'd find an heir, someone who could help me, and then he died, and I thought..." He stopped himself. It doesn't matter what I thought, but Margaret understood. He'd thought he was alone again, trapped forever. She moved to the desk, studying the papers. Legal documents in precise script, maps of territories marked with different colors, letters sealed with wax bearing unfamiliar crests. "Show me the curse," she said. "The exact terms." Adrian pulled a leather-bound book from the desk drawer, smaller than the others, with a lock that opened at his touch. Inside, the pages were vellum, the ink a disturbing rust color that Margaret suspected wasn't ink at all. "Blood writing," Adrian confirmed, seeing her expression. "The only way to make contracts binding on vampire kind. This was written in 1823, after I'd fled House Corvus and sought sanctuary with House Thorn. They granted it, but at a price." He opened to a page covered in elegant script. Margaret leaned closer, reading Adrian Ashford, formerly of House Corvus, now under protection of House Thorn, is hereby bound to the estate of Ravenmere under the following terms. He shall not leave the boundaries of the property, without invitation from a willing heir of the Ashford bloodline. He shall not feed from any human within 10 miles without consent freely given. He shall maintain the estate and its lands until such time as a mortal heir appears to claim inheritance. Should he violate these terms, his protection is forfeit, and House Corvus may reclaim him. This bond may only be dissolved by a ritual of release, performed with a willing heir's blood, given in full knowledge and consent. Margaret read it twice, parsing the formal language. "You're a prisoner. A protected prisoner." Adrian's smile was bitter. House Thorn ensured I couldn't be reclaimed by Corvus, but they also ensured I couldn't run. This house became my cage, the lake my moat, and I've been here, alone, for 200 years. Not entirely alone. Cornelius visited, studied, helped. Adrian closed the book, but he couldn't perform the ritual. He wasn't direct enough in the bloodline. The curse requires someone who inherits through marriage or birth, someone who can legally claim the estate, someone like you. Margaret moved to the window, staring at her reflection in the dark glass. She looked small, worn, a woman beaten down by circumstance. Behind her reflection, Adrian stood like a shadow given form. "What does the ritual require?" she asked. "Your blood willingly given. A specific incantation. A witness from House Thorn to verify the terms are met." He paused. "And one night, the blood bond takes time to dissolve. You would need to stay here with me until dawn breaks the connection." Margaret turned. "One night. One night in which you cannot leave, cannot change your mind, cannot run if you become afraid." Adrian's expression was grave. "I won't lie to you, Margaret. The ritual will hurt. Not physically, but..." He struggled for words. "Breaking a blood bond means feeling everything the bond contained. 200 years of isolation, rage, loneliness. You'll feel all of it for a few hours until the magic releases. And you? What will you feel? Your fear, your pain, your regrets." His eyes held hers. "I'll feel what my freedom costs you." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. "Why tell me this? You could have hidden it, made it sound easy. Because consent matters." Adrian moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. "House Corvus took my mortality without asking. They turned me, bound me, controlled me. I won't do the same to you. You deserve the truth. All of it, before you decide." Margaret studied him. This beautiful, terrible creature who'd been alive when her great-great-grandparents were children, who carried centuries of loneliness like a weight he'd learned to bear. "The fortune Cornelius left," she said slowly. "How much?" "Enough to clear your husband's debts 10 times over. Enough to buy a house in London, Paris, anywhere you choose. Enough to never worry about money again." Adrian's gaze didn't waver. "I don't need it. I've had 2 centuries to accumulate wealth. This is yours, freely given, whether you help me or not. Why? Because you came." His voice softened. "Because you're here, standing in this cursed house, asking questions instead of running. Because Cornelius believed in you, even though he never met you. And because..." He stopped, as if the words cost him something. "Because I'm tired, Margaret. So tired of being alone." The vulnerability in his admission cracked something in her chest. She'd felt that same exhaustion watching Thomas gamble away their future, knowing she was powerless to stop him. The bone-deep weariness of carrying burdens alone. "I need time," she said finally, "to read everything, Understand what I'm agreeing to. Take all the time you need. Adrian moved toward the door. The house is yours to explore. I've prepared a room for you. Second floor, east wing. Mrs. Havisham, she's human, comes from the village to maintain what she can. Left food in the kitchen. He paused in the doorway. One more thing. The house has rules. Don't enter rooms with red wax seals on the doors. Those are my day chambers. Sunlight doesn't reach them, and He hesitated. I'm not always in control when I first wake. I wouldn't want to hurt you. Margaret nodded, filing away this piece of vampire lore. And Margaret? Adrian looked back at her. Thank you. For not running, for listening. It's more kindness than I've known in a very long time. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the library with documents that promised freedom or damnation. She couldn't yet tell which. Margaret pulled a chair to the desk and began to read. Outside, the lake rippled, and somewhere in the house, ancient wood settled with sounds like whispers. She had 3 days before the carriage returned. 3 days to decide if she would free a vampire or condemn them both to this beautiful, terrible prison. Chapter 3. The habits of the undead Margaret woke to absolute darkness. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. Ravenmere, the vampire. The impossible choice weighing on her like stones. She'd fallen asleep at the library desk, exhausted from reading legal documents and blood contracts until the words blurred. Someone had carried her to bed. Someone impossibly strong and terrifyingly gentle. Her heart hammered as she sat up, finding herself in an enormous 4-poster bed draped with burgundy velvet. The room was opulent. Carved furniture, thick carpets, a fireplace where embers still glowed faintly. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed, and her boots had been placed neatly by the door. Adrian had undressed her boots, had carried her here, had tucked her beneath covers that smelled of lavender and age. The intimacy of it made her skin prickle. A clock on the mantel read 3 a.m. Margaret rose, wrapping herself in the dressing gown someone had laid out, and moved to the window. The lake stretched black and endless beneath a sky full of stars. No moon tonight. Just darkness, and the distant tree line like jagged teeth. She should be afraid. Should be planning her escape. Instead, she found herself curious. Margaret lit a candle from the fireplace embers and slipped into the corridor. The house was different at night, alive in ways it hadn't been during the day. She heard sounds, distant music, footsteps that might have been her imagination, whispers in languages she didn't recognize. She followed the sounds down the grand staircase, through corridors lined with those watching portraits. The music grew louder. A piano, played with technical precision but no warmth. Just notes marching through the darkness like soldiers. Margaret found the music room behind double doors she didn't remember seeing before. Adrian sat at a grand piano, his fingers moving across the keys with inhuman speed. He'd removed his coat, wore only a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. In the candlelight, his skin looked like marble, flawless and cold. He stopped playing the moment she entered. "I woke you," he said, not turning around. "I'm sorry. I forget how well sound travels in this house." I was already awake. Margaret moved closer, studying him. "Do you sleep?" "Not the way you do." Adrian's hands rested on the keys, still as death. "During the day, I retreat. It's not sleep exactly. More like surrendering to the exhaustion that comes with fighting the sun. But at night, I'm entirely alert. I don't require rest." "That sounds lonely." "It is." He finally looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. 200 years of nights, Margaret. Do you know how many hours that is? How many dark, empty hours with nothing but memories and regret? Margaret moved to sit on the bench beside him, leaving careful space between them. "Play something else. Something you love, not just something you know." Adrian's fingers hovered over the keys. "I'm not sure I remember what I love anymore." "Try." He began to play, slowly at first, then building into something achingly beautiful. A melody that felt like longing given form, like all the years of isolation compressed into music. Margaret closed her eyes, letting it wash over her, and felt tears slip down her cheeks. When the last note faded, the silence was profound. Chopin, Adrian said quietly. He wrote it 50 years before I was born. I heard it performed once in Vienna in 1875. I still remember every note. It's beautiful and sad. Most beautiful things are. He studied her face in the candlelight. You've been crying. Your music makes me feel things I've been trying not to feel. Margaret wiped her eyes. Grief, loss, the weight of time passing. Your husband, Thomas. His name felt strange in her mouth now, as if he belonged to a different life. I should miss him more than I do. I should be devastated, but mostly I just feel empty. Like I wasted years loving someone who never saw me as anything but convenient. Adrian's hands tensed on the keys. He hurt you. Not physically. Never that. Margaret pulled the dressing gown tighter. But there are other ways to be cruel. He gambled. Made promises he couldn't keep. Let me believe we had a future while he destroyed everything we'd built. And I stayed, because I thought that's what wives did. I thought love meant enduring. Love should never mean enduring cruelty. Adrian's voice carried the weight of experience. I loved once. Before I was turned, a woman named Catherine. She was kind, intelligent, saw the world differently than anyone I'd known. I was going to ask for her hand. What happened? House Corvus happened. His jaw tightened. They turned me without warning, broke into my room one night, held me down, and forced their blood down my throat. When I woke 3 days later, I was a monster. Catherine took one look at me and screamed. Margaret's chest ached for him. I'm sorry. It was 200 years ago. She's been dust for centuries. But his voice betrayed the lie. I've loved since then, briefly, carefully. But it always ends the same way. They age, I don't. They die, I continue. Eventually, I stop trying. That's no way to exist. No, Adrian agreed. But it's the only way I know. They sat in silence, the piano between them like a bridge. Margaret studied his profile, the sharp cheekbones, the too pale skin, the eyes that held centuries of sorrow. You don't eat, she observed. I've been here a full day, and I haven't seen you eat or drink anything but wine. Very observant. A hint of a smile touched his lips. No, food tastes like ash to me now. I can drink wine, strong spirits, but they don't nourish. Only blood sustains us. When did you last feed? The question hung between them, dangerous and intimate. 3 weeks ago, a woman from the village. She comes monthly, offers her blood willingly in exchange for gold. Adrian's eyes met hers. I take only what I need, never enough to harm, and I make certain she consents every time. Verbal, explicit consent. Without it, the act becomes violence. Does it hurt them? No, if done correctly, it's pleasant. Euphoric, even. Our bite releases something into the bloodstream, a venom that dulls pain and creates a sense of deep relaxation. Most donors describe it as intensely intimate. Margaret's pulse quickened. But you're hungry now. How did you... He stopped, understanding. My control is slipping. You can see it. She could. The way his eyes tracked her pulse at her throat. The tension in his shoulders. The careful distance he maintained. You should go back to your room, Adrian said quietly. Being near me when I'm like this isn't safe. You won't hurt me. You can't know that. Yes, I can. Margaret turned to face him fully. Because if you wanted to feed from me, you could have done it while I slept. You carried me to bed, removed my boots, made me comfortable. A monster wouldn't do that. A monster would have taken what he wanted. Adrian's hands trembled against the keys. You don't understand what you're offering. I'm not offering anything. I'm stating a fact. Margaret stood, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the conversation. You're starving yourself to make me feel safe. Stop. Go to the village, feed. I'm not going anywhere. You promise? The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. I promise. I'll be here when you return. Adrian studied her for a long moment, then rose with that liquid grace. I'll be back before dawn. Don't, he paused. Don't open the red-sealed doors, and if you hear anything strange, stay in your room. What kind of strange? Old houses have memories. Sometimes they replay. Echoes of violence, of passion, of all the lives lived within these walls. His expression was grave. Ravenmere has seen much darkness. Not all of it stays buried. Before Margaret could respond, he was gone, a shadow moving too fast for human sight, leaving only the lingering scent of old books and winter. She stood alone in the music room, surrounded by instruments that hadn't been played in decades, and felt the house settle around her like a living thing. 3 days until the carriage returned. 2 nights since she'd arrived, and Margaret realized with startling clarity that she didn't want to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Chapter 4. Echoes and Truths. Margaret didn't return to her room. Instead, she wandered the house with her single candle, drawn by curiosity stronger than caution. The corridors twisted in ways that defied logic. She was certain she'd passed the same portrait 3 times, though she'd taken no turns. The house was playing with her. Or perhaps it was simply alive in ways mortal structures weren't. She found herself on the 3rd floor, in a wing that felt older than the rest. The air here was thick, heavy with the scent of dust and something else. Copper, like old pennies. Like blood. Margaret paused before a door without a red seal. Just plain wood, slightly ajar, with a thin line of pale light showing beneath. She shouldn't enter. Should respect Adrian's privacy, his secrets. But her hand was already pushing the door open. The room beyond stole her breath. It was a studio, an artist's workspace frozen in time. Canvases lined the walls, dozens of them, all portraits of the same woman. She was beautiful in an ethereal way. Dark curls, kind eyes, a smile that suggested she was mid-laugh in every painting. Catherine. Margaret moved closer, studying the technique. The paintings were old, the style dated to the early 1800s, but the emotion in each brushstroke was raw. This was love captured in oil and pigment, devotion that had survived 2 centuries. He painted these before. A woman's voice, aged and knowing. Margaret spun to find an elderly woman in the doorway, small, gray-haired with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Havisham, Margaret guessed. The housekeeper. Aye, and you're the heir. The old woman entered, studying Margaret with frank appraisal. You've got more spine than the last few who came. Most ran screaming before nightfall. There were others? Distant cousins, fortune hunters. Cornelius invited them, hoping one would be brave enough to help Lord Adrian. Mrs. Havisham moved to straighten a canvas. They all failed. Saw him and fled. You're the first who stayed. Margaret looked back at the portraits. He loved her very much. More than life itself. More than his own humanity, perhaps. The housekeeper's voice softened. He was 24 when they turned him. Just a boy, really. Had his whole life ahead of him. Catherine was going to be his wife. They'd planned everything. The house they'd buy, the children they'd have. Normal, human things. And House Corvus destroyed it all. They destroyed him. Mrs. Havisham met Margaret's eyes, but he survived it. Endured 200 years in this prison because somewhere deep down, he still hopes, still believes in something beyond survival. Why are you telling me this? Because you're considering the ritual. I can see it in your face, the way you look at him, the way you ask questions instead of making demands. The old woman smiled. And because he deserves someone who understands what his freedom will cost him. Cost him? He'll be free. Free to leave this house. Free to resume his existence in a world that's changed beyond recognition. Mrs. Havisham's expression turned grave. But he'll also be leaving the only home he's known for 2 centuries. The only constant in an endless life. That kind of freedom is terrifying, child. Especially when you've forgotten how to live without walls. The words settled over Margaret like snow. He's afraid, she said slowly, understanding. That's why he warned me so thoroughly about the ritual. Why he gave me reasons to refuse. He's afraid of being free. Wouldn't you be? After so long? Before Margaret could answer, the house shuddered. Not earthquake. Not wind. Something else. A ripple through reality itself, making the candle flames dance and the paintings rattle against walls. Mrs. Havisham's expression tightened. The echoes. They're strong tonight. Adrian mentioned. The temperature plummeted. Margaret's breath misted, and frost crept across the windows in delicate patterns. The portraits seemed to darken, Catherine's smile turning sinister in the shifting light. Then Margaret heard it. Voices, raised in argument. A man's voice, Adrian's, but younger, desperate. And others, cold and commanding. You'll serve House Corvus or you'll die. I won't become like you. I won't feed on innocence. You have no choice. You're ours now. Forever. The echo intensified, and Margaret saw them. Translucent figures moving through the room like ghosts. A younger Adrian backing against a wall. 3 vampires in antique clothing, their eyes glowing red with hunger and cruelty. It's the night they bound him, Mrs. Havisham whispered. The night House Corvus gave him the ultimatum. Submit, or face destruction. Margaret watched, transfixed and horrified, as the echo Adrian fell to his knees. Please, there must be another way. The lead vampire, a woman with hair like spun gold, smiled with terrible beauty. There is. Swear yourself to this house. Accept its protection and its prison. House Thorn will shield you from us, but you'll never leave. You'll rot here, alone, until you beg for death. I accept. The words echoed through the room, heavy with finality. The figures dissolved like smoke, leaving only silence and the lingering scent of old magic. Margaret's heart hammered. He chose this, chose imprisonment over serving them. He chose principle over freedom, isolation over cruelty. Mrs. Havisham moved toward the door. Not many would make that choice. Fewer still would survive it. The old woman paused in the doorway. Your room is warded. The echoes can't reach you there. I suggest you return before the house shows you something worse. But Margaret couldn't move. She stood among the portraits of a lost love, in a room that remembered betrayal, and understood with sudden clarity what Adrian had sacrificed. Not just his humanity. Not just his freedom, his hope, his future, everything that made existence bearable, and he'd endured it for 200 years rather than become a monster. Margaret returned to her room in a daze, her mind churning. She bolted the door, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling as dawn approached. She heard Adrian return, his footsteps in the corridor, the pause outside her door, the careful retreat when he realized she was awake. Thank you, she whispered to the empty room, for choosing honor, for surviving, for being worth saving. She didn't know if he could hear her, but somehow she thought he did, because the footsteps paused again, longer this time. And when they finally moved away, Margaret felt something shift in the house. The oppressive weight lifted, just slightly, as if Ravenmere itself had been waiting for someone to see Adrian truly, not as a monster or a prisoner, but as a man who'd made an impossible choice and lived with its consequences. Margaret fell asleep as true dawn broke, thinking of portraits and echoes and the terrible courage it took to survive alone. When she woke hours later, she found a note slipped under her door. You shouldn't have seen that. I'm sorry the house showed you my weakness. If you want to leave, I'll arrange immediate passage to London. No ritual, no obligation. Just freedom. Margaret read it twice, then tore it into careful pieces. She wasn't leaving. Not when she'd finally found someone who understood what it meant to endure. Chapter 5. When monsters come calling, Margaret found Adrian in the library at sunset, staring at the torn pieces of his notes scattered across the desk. I'm not leaving, she said without preamble. He didn't turn from the window. You should. After what you saw, I saw a man choose imprisonment over becoming a monster. I saw courage. She moved closer, studying his reflection in the darkening glass. Why does that frighten you more than if I'd seen you as a villain? Because villains are easy to leave. Adrian's voice was raw. Heroes are harder to abandon. I'm not abandoning you. You should. He finally turned, and Margaret saw something desperate in his silver eyes. Margaret, you don't understand what you're binding yourself to. The ritual will connect us, however briefly. You'll feel everything. My hunger, my loneliness, my rage at what was stolen from me. It will mark you in ways you can't anticipate. Then explain it to me. All of it. No more careful omissions. Adrian studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the chairs by the fireplace. When they were seated, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Blood bonds create resonance, he began. When vampire and human share blood intentionally, with ritual words, it forms a connection. Temporary ones for feeding, permanent ones for turning. The ritual to break my curse falls between. It will tie us together for one night, maybe longer, until the magic releases. What does tied together mean? You'll feel my emotions as if they were your own. I'll sense your fear, your pain, your every thought about me. His jaw tightened. There's nowhere to hide in a blood bond, Margaret. No polite lies, no careful masks, just raw truth between two souls. Margaret absorbed this. And after, when the bond breaks, we separate cleanly. You'll remember what you felt, but the connection ends. You'll be free, he paused. Unless what? Unless the bond doesn't want to break. Adrian's voice dropped. It's rare, but sometimes a blood bond finds compatibility. Two people whose essences fit together in ways that defy severance. When that happens, the bond can become permanent unless actively dissolved. You mean I could be connected to you forever? Yes. He met her eyes. I should have told you before, but I was desperate, and you were my only hope, and I convinced myself the probability was small enough to ignore. Margaret should be angry. Should feel manipulated. Instead, she found herself curious. Has it happened before? To you? Once, centuries ago. Adrian's expression turned distant. A young man who worked for House Thorne. We performed a minor bonding ritual for protection. He was traveling through Corvus territory. The bond should have lasted a week. It lasted until he died of old age. 60 years later. You felt him die. I felt him live. Adrian's voice softened. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment of his human existence. It was the most beautiful and terrible experience of my immortal life. And when his heart finally stopped, I felt that too. Felt the exact moment his soul left the world. Tears pricked Margaret's eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be. Those 60 years reminded me what it meant to be connected to something beyond survival. To care about someone's happiness more than my own existence. He leaned back, exhausted. But it also taught me the cost. Loving mortals means watching them wither while you remain frozen. It's exquisite torture. Is that why you've stayed alone? Yes. Simple. Final. I couldn't bear it again. So I stopped trying, stopped hoping. Just endured. Margaret understood that kind of endurance, had practiced it herself through years of Thomas's broken promises and empty apologies. If the bond becomes permanent, she said carefully, what happens to me? Do I age normally? You age, you die, you remain entirely human. The bond doesn't change your nature, only creates awareness between us. You'd feel my presence like a weight in your mind. Know when I'm hungry, angry, afraid, and I'd know the same about you. That doesn't sound terrible. Adrian laughed, sharp and bitter. It's a loss of privacy so profound it drives some people mad. Imagine never having a thought that's truly yours alone. Never feeling an emotion without someone else experiencing it secondhand. I've been alone in my own head for years, Margaret said quietly. It hasn't made me any less lonely. The truth of her words hung between them like a bridge. Before Adrian could respond, glass shattered somewhere below them. He was on his feet instantly. Every muscle tensed, his eyes flashing silver. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. What now, Margaret? He was gone, moving with that impossible speed. Margaret heard shouts. The crash of furniture. A sound like thunder echoing through the house. She should obey. Should hide like he ordered. Instead, she grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace and limped toward the door. The corridor was chaos. Two figures fought at the base of the grand staircase. Adrian and another vampire, this one with red eyes and a smile like broken glass. They moved too fast to track, a blur of violence and inhuman strength. Lord Ashford. A woman's voice, honey-sweet and venomous, still playing protector to mortals? How quaint. Margaret turned to find a female vampire blocking the corridor behind her. Beautiful and terrible, with hair like spun gold and eyes that gleamed with malice. Lady Cassia. Margaret recognized her from the portraits in the entrance hall. You must be the heir, Cassia said, moving closer with predatory grace. The little widow come to free our wayward son. How touching. Margaret raised the poker, hands shaking. Stay back. Or what? You'll strike me with iron? Cassia laughed. That's an old wives' tale, darling. Iron doesn't harm us. Nothing mortal does. From below, Adrian's roar shook the house. Cassia, this is House Thorn territory. You violate the Accords by being here. The Accords are dying, Cassia called back. House Corvus no longer recognizes them. We're reclaiming what's ours, including you. She lunged. Margaret swung the poker with desperate strength. It connected with Cassia's temple, and to Margaret's shock, the vampire staggered. Iron from Ravenmere's forge, Margaret gasped, understanding. The house protects its own. Cassia's eyes narrowed, now genuinely dangerous. Clever girl. But cleverness won't save you from... Adrian appeared between them, moving so fast Margaret didn't see him arrive. His hand wrapped around Cassia's throat, lifting her off the ground. Touch her, he said, his voice gone inhuman and ancient. And I will end you. Accords be damned. House Corvus be damned. I will burn your entire line to ash. Cassia smiled despite the hand crushing her windpipe. There he is, the monster we made. Welcome back, Adrian. He dropped her, and she landed with cat-like grace. Below, the other vampire had fled, leaving broken furniture and shattered windows. This is your warning, Cassia said, backing toward the stairs. Cornelius is dead. His protection is void. The curse will hold you here until you starve, or until we reclaim you. Either way, House Corvus wins. She paused at the landing. And the little widow? She'll make a lovely addition to our collection. Then she was gone, vanishing into the night with her companion. Adrian stood frozen, his shoulders heaving despite not needing to breathe. Margaret watched his hands tremble, watched the careful control slip. Adrian, don't. He wouldn't look at her. Don't come closer. I'm not safe right now. But Margaret understood. She'd seen it in his eyes when he'd threatened Cassia. The monster he kept leashed. The violence he'd controlled for 200 years. You protected me, she said softly. That's not a monster. That's what heroes do. Adrian finally looked at her, and Margaret saw tears on his two pale cheeks. I almost lost you. She was going to take you and I... His voice broke. I can't do this again, Margaret. Can't care about someone and watch them be destroyed because of me. Margaret set down the poker and moved to him despite the danger, despite the warning in his eyes. Then let's break the curse, she said. Tonight. Right now, let's free you before House Corvus returns with more than just 2 vampires. The ritual? I don't care about the risks. I don't care if the bond becomes permanent. Margaret took his hands, feeling how cold they were. I care that you're trapped, that they're coming for you, that we're running out of time. Adrian stared at her as if she were something precious and impossible. You're certain? I've never been more certain of anything. He pulled her close, and Margaret felt his relief like a physical thing. Then we begin at midnight, he whispered against her hair. And may God forgive us both. Chapter 6. The Ritual of Blood and Binding. The hours before midnight stretched like centuries. Adrian sent word to House Thorn, a messenger raven that flew into the darkness carrying news of the ritual. They would send a witness, he explained, someone to verify the bond was formed correctly, and the curse dissolved according to ancient law. Margaret spent the time preparing herself. She bathed in water Mrs. Havisham heated, dressed in a simple white gown the housekeeper produced from somewhere in the house's depths. It felt ceremonial, like preparing for a wedding or a funeral. Perhaps it was both. You're brave, Mrs. Havisham said, braiding Margaret's damp hair. Or foolish. I haven't decided which. Can I be both? The old woman's laugh was soft. Aye, most brave things are foolish when you look at them closely. She secured the braid with a ribbon. He cares for you, you know, more than he's cared for anyone in a very long time. Margaret's chest tightened. He barely knows me. Sometimes knowing takes seconds, not years. I saw how he looked at you when that Corvus witch threatened you, like you were the only thing in the world worth saving. Mrs. Havisham met Margaret's eyes in the mirror. Just be careful with his heart. It's been broken so many times. I'm not sure how much more it can take. At midnight, Adrian came for her. He changed into formal clothing, black velvet and silver buttons, his hair bound back with a ribbon. He looked like something from another century, beautiful and otherworldly and terribly young despite his ancient eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked. Margaret took his offered hand. "Yes." He led her down to the library, where the furniture had been pushed to the walls, and a circle had been drawn on the floor in what looked like salt mixed with something darker. Candles burned at 4 points: north, south, east, west, their flames unnaturally still. A figure waited in the shadows. Lord Ashford. The voice was female, cultured, carrying weight. "I am Lady Seraphine, representative of House Thorne. I've come to witness the dissolution of your binding." She stepped into the candlelight, and Margaret caught her breath. The vampire was ethereally beautiful, silver hair to her waist, eyes like molten gold, features that could have been carved by a master sculptor. "This is Margaret Thorne," Adrian said formally, "heir to the Ashford estate by marriage. She offers her blood willingly to break the curse that binds me to Ravenmere." Seraphine's golden eyes studied Margaret with unsettling intensity. "You understand the risks, the pain, the possibility of permanent connection." "I understand." Margaret's voice was steady. "And still you consent?" "Yes." "Then let the ritual begin." Seraphine moved to stand outside the circle. "By the laws of House Thorne and the accords that govern all vampire kind, I witness this bond. May it be forged in consent and dissolved in freedom." Adrian drew Margaret into the center of the circle. Up close, she could see his hands shaking, could smell something like winter storms and old parchment emanating from his skin. "Once we begin," he said quietly, "we cannot stop. The magic will take hold, and it must run its course. If you're going to change your mind, do it now." Margaret touched his face, feeling the coolness of his skin. "I'm not changing my mind." "Then we start." Adrian produced a ceremonial dagger, silver with a pearl handle, ancient and beautiful. "I'll cut your palm first, then mine. When our blood touches, the bond will form. You'll feel everything I feel, and the curse will begin to unravel. It will hurt, Margaret. Not your body, but your soul. Are you ready?" "Yes." He took her left hand, turning it palm up. The blade gleamed in the candlelight. "By blood offered freely," Adrian began, his voice taking on ritual cadence. "By consent given wholly, by magic bound and broken, I claim this bond. Let it form with honor and dissolve with grace." The blade cut. Margaret gasped at the sharp sting, watching blood well dark against her pale skin. Adrian lifted his own hand, cut his palm with a single decisive stroke. His blood was darker than hers, almost black. "Join hands," Seraphine instructed. Margaret pressed her palm to Adrian's. The moment their blood touched, the world exploded. Fire raced through her veins, not painful, but overwhelming. She felt Adrian everywhere, his consciousness flooding hers like a tide. Loneliness so vast it could swallow oceans. Hunger that gnawed at the edges of sanity. Rage at being trapped, being turned, being made into something he never chose, and underneath it all, hope. Fragile and desperate and entirely focused on her. Margaret cried out, her knees buckling. Adrian caught her, holding her upright as the bond settled into place like a key turning in a lock. "I feel you," she gasped. "God, Adrian, I feel everything. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But even as he apologized, she felt his relief, his joy at finally not being alone in his own head. The curse began to unravel. Margaret felt it like chains breaking, invisible bonds that had held Adrian to Ravenmere for 2 centuries snapping one by one. Each break sent shock waves through the bond, through both of them. Accompanied by flashes of memory, Adrian at 24, human and alive and in love. Adrian turned against his will, screaming as vampire blood burned through his veins. Adrian kneeling in this very room, accepting imprisonment to escape Corvus's control. Adrian painting portraits of Catherine night after endless night, trying to remember what it felt like to love without fear. Adrian alone in the darkness, wondering if death would be mercy. 200 years of isolation crashed over Margaret in waves, and she understood with devastating clarity what he'd endured. Not just imprisonment, but the slow erosion of hope, the terrible weight of continuing to exist when existence lost all meaning. "I'm sorry," she sobbed against his shoulder. "I'm so sorry you were alone so long." "Not anymore." Adrian's arms tightened around her. "I'm not alone anymore." The last chain broke with a sound like shattering crystal. Power exploded outward from the circle, snuffing the candles and sending books flying from shelves. Margaret felt the curse dissolve completely, felt Adrian's shock as he realized he was truly, finally free. But the bond remained. They stood together in darkness, their blood still mingling, the connection between them burning bright and unbroken. "It should have released by now," Seraphine said, her voice cutting through the silence. "The curse is broken, but the bond won't let go," Adrian finished. He pulled back just enough to look at Margaret's face. "The bond found compatibility. It's not releasing us." Margaret felt his fear through the connection, not of the bond itself, but of what it meant. Permanent connection to someone who would age and die while he remained frozen. "Is there a way to break it?" she asked. "If we wanted to, yes." Seraphine moved closer, studying them both. "But it requires both parties to want severance. If even one desires to maintain the bond, it will hold." The question hung between them, unspoken but clear. Did they want this? To be connected forever, aware of each other's every emotion, unable to hide anything? Through the bond, Margaret felt Adrian's turmoil. His desire to keep her close warring with his fear of watching her die. His desperate need for connection fighting against his certainty that he didn't deserve it. "Adrian," Margaret said softly, "what do you want?" His silver eyes met hers, and she felt the truth before he spoke it. "I want to keep you." His voice broke. "God help me, I want to keep you so badly it terrifies me." "Then keep me." Margaret's hands found his face. "I'm choosing this. Choosing you. Choosing connection over isolation. You'll age, yes. You'll die. Eventually. And I'll have to watch, yes." Margaret's thumbs brushed his too pale cheeks. "But until then, you won't be alone. And neither will I. Isn't that worth the grief that comes later?" Through the bond, she felt his resistance crumble, felt the moment he stopped fighting and surrendered to hope. "Yes," he whispered. "God, yes." He kissed her then, desperate and gentle and entirely human in its need. Margaret kissed him back, tasting winter and want and the sharp copper of their mingled blood. The bond flared bright between them, settling permanently into place. When they broke apart, Seraphine was smiling. "Then it's done. The curse is broken, the bond is sealed. Lord Ashford, you're free to leave Ravenmere. And you, Margaret Thorne, are bound to a vampire by blood and choice. May you both find what you're seeking." She moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "One more thing. House Corvus knows about the ritual by now. They'll come in force, and they won't stop at threats. You have perhaps a day, maybe 2. I suggest you use it wisely." Then she was gone, leaving them alone in the ruined library with blood on their palms and a bond that would never break. "What do we do now?" Margaret asked. Adrian smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. "Now, we prepare for war. But first," he swept her into his arms, carrying her toward the door. "First, we celebrate freedom." Chapter 7. The storm before dawn. Adrian carried Margaret to her room, and through the bond she felt what he felt. Relief so profound it made him shake, joy edged with terror, and underneath it all, a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. He set her down gently by the fireplace, then stepped back as if proximity might break him. "I should go," he said, not moving. "Let you rest. The bond will be overwhelming for a while, and I..." "Stay." Margaret caught his hand. "Please. I don't want to be alone with all these feelings I can't sort from yours." Through the bond, she felt his conflict. desire warring with propriety, need fighting against the fear of taking too much. Margaret, I've been alone for 2 centuries. I don't trust myself to... He stopped, jaw tightening. I don't want to overwhelm you. You're not. She tugged him toward the chair by the fire. Sit, talk to me. Help me understand what I'm feeling. Adrian obeyed, and Margaret settled in the opposite chair, studying him in the firelight. The bond hummed between them, not invasive as she'd feared, but comforting. Like finally having company in a house she'd thought empty. The hunger, she said. I feel it. Is that blood hunger, or both? His voice was rough. I fed tonight, but the bond intensifies everything. Your pulse, your warmth, the fact that you're alive and I'm not. It creates a kind of wanting. For blood? For connection. Adrian's eyes met hers. Blood is how vampires connect, Margaret. It's sustenance and intimacy and power all woven together. When I feed, I'm not just taking nourishment. I'm sharing something profound with the donor, feeling their life force, their emotions, their essence. Margaret absorbed this. And now, with the bond, now I feel your life constantly. Your heartbeat is a drum in my mind. Your emotions color everything I experience. It's intoxicating and terrifying. He leaned forward. I could ask for your blood, and through the bond, you'd probably say yes because you'd feel how badly I want it. That's why I won't ask. Can't ask. The bond removes too many barriers to consent. Understanding crashed over Margaret. He was protecting her from his own desire, from the pull of the bond that could blur lines between what she truly wanted and what he needed. What if I offered? She asked quietly. Without you asking. Would that be real consent? Adrian's hands gripped the chair arms. Margaret, I'm serious. You said feeding is intimate when done right, that it creates connection. We're already connected. Maybe... She paused, choosing words carefully. Maybe it would help. Make the bond feel less like an invasion and more like a conversation. You don't know what you're offering. Then explain it to me. Adrian stood, pacing to the window, putting distance between them. Through the bond, Margaret felt his control fraying like old rope. When a vampire feeds from someone they're bonded to, it creates a feedback loop. I'd feel your pleasure, you'd feel my satisfaction, and it would spiral until neither of us knew where one ended and the other began. It's the most intimate thing 2 beings can share. More intimate than... Yes. He cut her off. More intimate than sex. More vulnerable than love. It's souls touching, Margaret. Completely unguarded. The bond thrummed between them, and Margaret felt his hunger spike as he described it. Felt his desperate desire tangling with fear of taking too much. I want to understand you, she said. All of you. Not just the parts you choose to show me. Why? The question was anguished. Why would you want to know a monster so completely? Because you're not a monster. Margaret rose, limping toward him. You're a man who's been alone too long. Who's forgotten that connection can be beautiful instead of just painful. Through the bond, she felt the moment his resistance shattered. Adrian turned, and his eyes were glowing silver, pupils blown wide with hunger and want. If we do this, there's no going back. You'll know me in ways no one has for 200 years, and I'll know you just as completely. Good. Margaret offered her wrist. No more hiding. Not from each other. Adrian caught her hand with trembling fingers, bringing her wrist to his lips. Not biting yet, just breathing against her skin, letting her feel his restraint. Tell me yes, he whispered. clearly, without the bond influencing you. Margaret met his eyes, and through the bond she let him feel her certainty, her trust, her desire to bridge the gap between them completely. Yes, Adrian, I consent freely. I want this. He bit. The sensation was nothing like pain. Fire raced up her arm, sweet and overwhelming, and through the bond she felt Adrian's relief as her blood hit his tongue, felt his satisfaction, his pleasure, his desperate gratitude that she was real and here and willing. And she felt more, his memories flooding through the connection. Catherine's face, young and laughing, the agony of turning, the endless nights alone, the slow erosion of hope, but also new memories forming. Margaret in the snow, so brave in her resignation. Margaret asking questions instead of running. Margaret standing beside him with a poker, ready to fight vampires she had no hope of defeating. Margaret choosing him despite everything. The feedback loop Adrian warned about began, her pleasure feeding his satisfaction, feeding her joy, feeding his relief. It spiraled up and up until Margaret couldn't tell where she ended, and he began. She felt herself sway, felt Adrian catch her and lower them both to the floor, never breaking the connection. Her blood sang through the bond, through him, through her again in an endless circuit of shared sensation. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I felt you," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "Not just your blood, but you, your courage, your grief over Thomas, your fear that you're not enough. Margaret, you're so much more than enough. And you're not a monster." She touched his face, seeing her blood on his lips. "You're lonely and brave and far kinder than you believe." The bond settled between them, no longer foreign but familiar. Margaret felt Adrian's presence like a second heartbeat, constant and reassuring. "Thank you," he said, "for trusting me, for seeing me. Thank you for being worth seeing." They stayed like that on the floor, wrapped in each other and the bond that connected them, while outside the window night deepened toward dawn. But the peace was short-lived. Glass shattered somewhere below. Multiple windows this time, not just one. Shouts echoed through the house, and through the bond Margaret felt Adrian's alarm spike into terror. "They're here." He was on his feet instantly, pulling her up. "Corvus brought an army." Margaret's blood went cold. "How many?" "Too many." Adrian moved to the door, his expression transforming from tender to lethal. "They're going to try to take me back, and they'll kill anyone who gets in their way." Through the bond, Margaret felt his fear, not for himself, but for her, for Mrs. Havisham, for everyone in Ravenmere. "We fight," she said. "You hide. I won't lose you to... We fight together." Margaret grabbed his arm. "You're not alone anymore, remember? That means I don't let you face this alone." Through the bond she felt his love. He didn't say the word, but the emotion flooded through clear and undeniable. "Then stay close to me," he said, "and trust that I'll keep you safe. Always." They descended the stairs together, toward the sounds of breaking glass and inhuman laughter, toward the battle that would decide whether Adrian's freedom lasted more than a single night. And through the bond, they felt each other's courage like a shield against the darkness coming for them both. Chapter 8. Blood and ash, the entrance hall had become a battlefield. 5 vampires stood among the shattered glass and overturned furniture, Cassia and 4 others Margaret didn't recognize. They moved with predatory confidence, knowing they had numbers and surprise. Adrian positioned himself at the base of the stairs, Margaret behind him, his body a shield between her and the intruders. "This is unnecessary." "Adrian," Cassia's voice dripped false sympathy. "House Corvus doesn't want war. We simply want what belongs to us, you. I belong to no one. Adrian's voice had gone cold and ancient. I dissolved my binding to Ravenmere. I'm free of House Thorn's protection, which means I'm also free of any obligation to Corvus. Free? Cassia laughed. You'll never be free of us. We made you. Your blood is ours. Your loyalty is ours. Your very existence is ours. Her eyes flicked to Margaret. And we'll destroy anyone who helps you forget that. Through the bond, Margaret felt Adrian's rage spike, but also his calculation. He was outnumbered, and any fight would put her at risk. He needed an advantage. Margaret's mind raced. 5 vampires, all stronger and faster than any human. Adrian could probably take 2, maybe 3, before being overwhelmed. But 5, then she remembered. The iron poker had hurt Cassia. Iron from Ravenmere's forge. While Adrian and Cassia continued their verbal sparring, Margaret edged toward the drawing room where more fireplace implements stood. Through the bond, she felt Adrian's awareness of her movement, felt his silent approval. Lord Corvus offers you one final chance, Cassia continued. Return willingly, resume your place in our house. We'll forget your indiscretion with the human, and if I refuse, then we take you by force, and the human dies screaming. Adrian moved so fast Margaret barely saw it. One moment he stood at the stairs. The next he had Cassia by the throat, lifted off the ground, his eyes blazing silver. Touch her, he snarled, and I will rain such destruction on House Corvus that songs will be sung of it for centuries. The other 4 vampires attacked as one. Adrian threw Cassia into them, buying seconds. Through the bond, Margaret felt his desperation, not for himself but for her safety. His fear that he'd miscalculated brought her into danger she couldn't survive. Margaret grabbed the iron poker and swung at the nearest vampire, a male with dark hair and cruel eyes. The iron connected with his ribs and he screamed, actual pain crossing his perfect features. The house protects its heirs, Margaret shouted. Every iron piece in Ravenmere can harm you. Adrian's relief flooded through the bond. He'd forgotten. 200 years of isolation had made him forget that Ravenmere's iron was forged with protective magic, bound to the Ashford bloodline. The battle shifted. Adrian fought with lethal grace, his movements a blur of controlled violence. Margaret swung the poker at any vampire who came close, and to her shock, they flinched from the iron as if it were fire. But they were still outnumbered. Still overwhelmed, one vampire, a woman with red hair and a smile like broken glass, got past Adrian's guard. She lunged at Margaret, moving too fast to dodge. Through the bond, Margaret felt Adrian's terror, felt him reaching for her, knowing he'd be too slow. The vampire's hands closed around Margaret's throat. Then something extraordinary happened. The house itself responded. Candles flared bright as sunlight. The portraits on the walls began to glow, their painted eyes blazing silver. And the iron in the very structure of Ravenmere, the nails, the hinges, the framework, began to heat. The red-haired vampire shrieked, her hands blistering where they touched Margaret's skin. She stumbled back, and Adrian was there, catching her head between his palms and twisting with sickening efficiency. The vampire turned to ash. The house recognizes her, Adrian said, wonder and relief in his voice. The bond made her an Ashford heir in truth. Ravenmere protects her like it protected me. Cassia's expression transformed from confident to furious. Impossible. She's human. The house can't. Blood bonds trump mortality. Adrian moved to stand beside Margaret, and through their connection she felt his fierce pride. She's mine and I'm hers. That makes her part of Ravenmere whether you accept it or not. The remaining 3 vampires exchanged glances. The odds had shifted dangerously. This isn't over, Cassia hissed. House Corvus will return with more. With hunters. With fire that not even Ravenmere can withstand. Then we'll be ready. Margaret's voice was steady despite her racing heart. And next time, we won't let you walk away. Through the bond, she felt Adrian's shock at her courage. His love, undeniable now, flooding through the connection like sunlight. Cassia bared her fangs in a smile that promised pain. Enjoy your mortal plaything while you can, Adrian. She'll age, she'll wither, she'll die, and you'll be alone again. That's the curse you can never break. Loving things that turn to dust. She gestured to her companions, and they retreated through the shattered windows, vanishing into the pre-dawn darkness. The moment they left, Adrian's control shattered. He pulled Margaret into his arms, checking her for injuries, his hands shaking as they ran over her throat where bruises were already forming. "You could have died," he said, his voice broken. "She could have snapped your neck before I reached you." But she didn't. Margaret covered his hands with hers. "The house protected me. You protected me. We survived." Through the bond, she felt his guilt. His certainty that keeping her close would get her killed. His fear that loving her was the most selfish thing he'd ever done. "Don't," Margaret said softly. "Don't regret the bond. Don't regret choosing connection. Adrian, I'd rather face danger with you than safety alone. You don't understand what you're saying. I do." She pulled back to look at his face. "Thomas kept me safe by keeping me small. He made every decision, controlled every aspect of our life, and called it protection. But it wasn't protection, it was a cage. You're not doing that. You're fighting beside me, not for me. That's the difference." Adrian stared at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Through the bond, she felt his emotions shift. Guilt transforming to understanding. Fear giving way to respect. "You're right," he said quietly. "I keep trying to protect you the way I wished someone had protected me when I was turned. But you're not me. You're choosing this with open eyes." "Exactly." He kissed her then, desperate and grateful and entirely honest in its need. Margaret kissed him back, tasting her own blood on his lips from where the bond had fed him earlier. When they broke apart, dawn was breaking through the shattered windows. "We need to secure the house," Adrian said, already moving toward assessment mode. "Board the windows, strengthen the wards, prepare for the next attack." "How long do we have?" "Days, maybe. Cassia will need to report to Lord Corvus, and he'll want to plan carefully now that he knows Ravenmere actively protects you." Adrian surveyed the damage. "But they'll come back, Margaret. With fire and hunters and everything they can muster. House Corvus doesn't forgive defiance. Then we don't wait for them." Margaret's mind was already working through possibilities. "We take the fight to them. Or better, we expose them." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "What are you thinking?" "Cassia said the Accords are dying. But what if they're not? What if House Corvus is violating the laws and hoping no one notices?" Margaret moved to the library, Adrian following. "Your curse mentioned the Accords. There must be other houses. Neutral ones who would care if Corvus is breaking ancient laws." Through the bond, she felt Adrian's hope kindle. "House Vesper," he said slowly. "They're the record keepers, the mediators. If we could prove Corvus violated the Accords by attacking Ravenmere, by threatening an heir under house protection, they'd have to intervene." Margaret pulled the blood-written contract from its locked drawer. "We have proof. Your curse, witness testimony from Lady Seraphine the attack tonight. We build a case." Adrian studied her with something like awe. "You're brilliant and terrifying. Have I mentioned that?" "Not recently." Margaret smiled despite the exhaustion pulling at her. "So we have a plan. Document everything. Contact House Vesper. Force Corvus to answer for their violations. It could work." Through the bond, she felt his hope warring with fear. "Or it could make us bigger targets." "We're already targets." Margaret touched his face. "At least this way, we fight smart instead of just surviving." Dawnlight filled the ruined entrance hall, and Adrian flinched from it reflexively before remembering he was free. Free to move through the house, free to leave Ravenmere entirely if he chose. "Thank you," he said softly, "for breaking my curse, for staying, for being brave enough for both of us. I'm not brave. I'm terrified." Margaret let him feel it through the bond. Her fear, her doubt, her certainty that she was in over her head. That's what makes it brave. Adrian pulled her close, doing it anyway. They stood together in the growing light, planning war against an ancient house, knowing the odds were against them. But through the bond, they felt each other's courage, each other's determination, and for the first time in 200 years, Adrian believed they might actually survive. Chapter 9. The price of freedom. 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and stolen moments. Adrian sent word to House Vesper through channels Margaret didn't fully understand. Messenger ravens that flew only at night. Letters written in blood that would burn if read by anyone but the intended recipient. They documented everything. Cassia's threats, the attack on Ravenmere, the violations of the accords that protected vampire territories and their human inhabitants. During the days, while Adrian slept in his sealed chamber, Margaret worked with Mrs. Havisham to fortify the house. They boarded windows, set iron barriers at every entrance, prepared weapons that the housekeeper produced from hidden armories Margaret hadn't known existed. Lord Adrian's been preparing for war for decades. Mrs. Havisham explained, showing Margaret a cache of iron stakes, blessed silver, and compounds that would burn even vampire flesh. He knew eventually House Corvus would come for him. He just hoped it wouldn't be in his lifetime. During the nights, Adrian taught Margaret about vampire politics, the delicate balance between houses, the laws that governed feeding and territory, the ancient rituals that bound their society together. And between lessons, they existed in the strange intimacy of the blood bond, learning to navigate shared emotions and tangled thoughts. Margaret discovered that the bond had nuances she hadn't anticipated. She could dim her awareness of Adrian when she needed privacy, and he could do the same. But when they were together, the connection sang between them, a constant conversation beneath words. She learned that he loved thunderstorms and hated silence, that he'd been a painter before his turning and still missed the smell of oil pigments, that he dreamed sometimes during his day sleep, and those dreams were always of Catherine or of freedom. He learned that Margaret had wanted to be a teacher before she married Thomas, that she'd loved books more than people for most of her life, that her limp came from a childhood accident her parents had called divine punishment for her curiosity. They learned each other the way scholars learned languages, immersively, completely, until they could anticipate thoughts before they were spoken. On the third night, a response came from House Vesper. Adrian read the letter in the library, his expression growing darker with each line. Through the bond, Margaret felt his anger rising. "What is it?" she asked. "House Vesper acknowledges our complaint. They'll convene a tribunal to hear evidence against House Corvus." He looked up, and his eyes were bleak. "In 6 weeks, at their stronghold in Edinburgh." "That's good, isn't it? They're taking us seriously." 6 weeks, Margaret." Adrian set down the letter. "We have to survive 6 weeks with Corvus hunting us. And then we have to travel to Edinburgh, through territories controlled by vampires who may or may not honor the accords. It's a death sentence dressed as due process." Through the bond, Margaret felt his despair, his certainty that they'd made a mistake, that he should have stayed trapped in Ravenmere rather than drag her into danger. "Then we make ourselves harder to kill," she said firmly. "We prepare better. We don't give Corvus an easy target." "You don't understand. I understand that you're 300 years old and you've survived worse than this." Margaret moved to stand before him. "You survived being turned against your will. Survived 2 centuries of isolation. Survived losing everyone you loved. You're still here, Adrian. Still fighting. Don't stop now." Through the bond, she pushed her certainty at him, her absolute faith that they would find a way through this. Adrian's resistance crumbled. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I'm terrified of losing you, of watching Corvus destroy the first good thing that's happened to me in centuries." "Then we don't let them." Margaret tilted her head back to look at him. "We fight smart. We survive. We make it to Edinburgh and we make Corvus answer for what they've done. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's necessary." She touched his face. "Unless you want to spend another 200 years trapped and alone. Because that's the alternative. Running, hiding, surrendering what we've built." Adrian caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "When did you become so brave?" when I had something worth being brave for. The truth of it resonated through the bond. She wasn't brave for herself. She was brave for him. For this connection that made her feel alive for the first time since she could remember. Adrian's love flooded through the bond, overwhelming and absolute. He didn't say the words, hadn't said them yet, but Margaret felt them in every thought, every emotion he couldn't hide. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "About the bond, about what happens if—" He stopped, struggling with the words. "If I die." Margaret finished for him. Through the bond, she felt his flinch. "Yes. If you die, the bond will try to take me with you. It's not instant, but—" His voice broke. "But I'll feel your death as if it were my own. It will hollow me out, Margaret. Leave me worse than I was before. And if you die first, you'll survive. Humans always do. The bond isn't strong enough to kill you. But you'll feel the absence like a wound that never heals. Like losing a limb you didn't know you had until it was gone." Margaret absorbed this. "So, either way, one of us suffers." "Yes." Adrian's arms tightened around her. "That's why I tried to warn you. Why I wanted you to understand the cost. Loving someone when you're bonded to them. It's exquisite and terrible. Every moment of joy is shadowed by the knowledge that one of you will be destroyed when it ends. Then we make every moment count." Margaret pulled back to look at his face. "No regrets, Adrian. No wishing we'd stayed distant. If we're going to be destroyed eventually anyway, let's at least be destroyed together." Through the bond, she felt his surrender. His acceptance that she'd chosen this with open eyes and wouldn't be persuaded to safety. "Together," he agreed. "Whatever comes." He kissed her, and the bond flared between them. Not feeding this time, just connection. Pure awareness of each other, souls touching in the space between breaths. When they broke apart, Adrian's expression had shifted to something determined. "Then we prepare for Edinburgh. And we prepare to win." He moved to the desk, pulling out maps. "If we're doing this, we do it properly. We don't just survive the tribunal. We destroy House Corvus's credibility so thoroughly they never threaten us again." Margaret joined him, studying the maps. "How?" "We find other victims. Other vampires. Corvus has turned against their will. Other territories they've violated. We build a case so comprehensive that House Vesper has no choice but to sanction them." His finger traced a route through Scotland. "It will mean traveling. Meeting with vampires who have no reason to trust us. Gathering evidence while Corvus hunts us. Dangerous. Deadly." Adrian met her eyes. "Are you certain you want this? Because I can still send you to London. Keep you safe while I—" "No." Margaret's voice was firm. "We agreed. Together. You don't do this alone." Through the bond, she felt his love spike into something that made her breath catch, made her understand that what they had wasn't just attraction or convenience. It was the kind of connection that came once in a lifetime. Once in several lifetimes, perhaps. "Then we leave tomorrow night," Adrian said. "We have 6 weeks to gather evidence and survive. After that, we face House Corvus in front of witnesses, and we make them pay for what they've done." Margaret touched the maps, tracing their planned route. "For you, for Catherine, for every person they've turned or killed or destroyed." Adrian caught her hand, pressing it flat against the map. "For us. For the future we're building." Yes. They spent the rest of the night planning. Routes, contacts, contingencies. Mrs. Havisham provided supplies, clothing suitable for travel, weapons concealed in luggage, letters of introduction to vampires who might help them. As dawn approached, Adrian walked Margaret to her room. "Get some rest," he said at her door. "Tomorrow night, everything changes." It already changed. Margaret touched his face. The night you carried me out of the snow. The night we formed the bond. Tomorrow is just the next step. Through the bond, she felt his agreement, his certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. Sleep well, Margaret. Dream of victory. Dream of freedom, she countered. Adrian smiled, and it transformed his face. I am free. You freed me. Everything else is just details. He left her then, retreating to his day chamber as the sun threatened the horizon. Margaret climbed into bed, exhausted but exhilarated, and, through the bond, she felt Adrian settle into his strange not sleep, felt his thoughts drift toward their journey, toward hope, fragile and new. And she understood. They were already free. The tribunal, the journey, the danger. Those were just obstacles. The real freedom had come the moment they'd chosen each other over isolation. Everything else was just survival, and Margaret was very, very good at surviving. Chapter 10. Into the night, together. The carriage waited at midnight, black lacquer gleaming under a sliver of moon. Margaret stood at Ravenmere's entrance. Wearing traveling clothes Mrs. Havisham had altered to fit, dark wool and practical boots, with hidden pockets for iron stakes and blessed silver. Her single trunk contained everything she owned, which wasn't much. She'd arrived with nothing. She was leaving with a vampire's heart and a blood bond that would last until death. It felt like a fair trade. Adrian emerged from the house, and Margaret's breath caught, despite knowing him so intimately through the bond. He wore modern clothing for the first time since she'd met him. Dark trousers, a coat that belonged to this century, his hair bound back. He looked less like a Gothic phantom and more like a dangerous man preparing for war. Ready? He asked, taking her trunk. No? Margaret smiled at his concern. But I'm going anyway. Mrs. Havisham appeared on the steps, her eyes suspiciously bright. You take care of each other, you hear me? And Lord Adrian, don't you dare let anything happen to her. I'd die first. The casual certainty in his voice made Margaret's chest tighten. The housekeeper pressed a packet into Margaret's hands. Food for the journey. And this, she added a small velvet pouch. Iron filings from Ravenmere's forge. Scatter them if you need a barrier. They'll burn any vampire who crosses them. Thank you. Margaret embraced her, feeling the old woman's bones beneath practical wool. For everything. For believing in us. Someone had to. Mrs. Havisham pulled back, wiping her eyes. Now go, and come back victorious, or don't come back at all. I won't have you living in fear. Adrian handed Margaret into the carriage, then climbed in beside her. Through the bond, she felt his melancholy. Leaving Ravenmere meant leaving the only home he'd known for 2 centuries. But she also felt his anticipation, his desperate hope that freedom might taste as sweet as it looked. The driver, a vampire Adrian had hired, one who owed him favors, snapped the reins. The carriage lurched forward, and Ravenmere began to recede behind them. Margaret watched through the window until the house disappeared into darkness. Regrets? Adrian asked quietly. Not even one. She turned to him. You? Through the bond, she felt his answer before he spoke it. Only that I didn't find you sooner, that we have decades instead of centuries together. Decades is more than most people get. Margaret took his hand. Let's not waste them wishing for impossible things. The journey to Edinburgh would take 2 weeks by carriage, moving only at night, sheltering in safe houses and sympathetic vampire territories during the days. Adrian had planned their route carefully, avoiding House Corvus lands, seeking neutral houses who might offer testimony against Corvus's violations. Their first stop came 3 nights later, a manor house outside Carlisle, home to Lord Brennan of House Dragon. He'd agreed to meet them, though Adrian warned that dragon vampires were unpredictable, artistic, passionate, prone to taking sides based on emotion rather than logic. Lord Brennan received them in a studio that smelled of paint and turpentine. He was younger than Adrian in appearance, turned perhaps at 20, with wild auburn hair and paint-stained hands. His eyes were gold instead of silver, marking him as dragon bloodline. Lord Ashford? Brennan's voice carried Irish lilt. 2 centuries you've been trapped, and now you walk free with a human bonded to you. You've been busy. House Corvus seeks to reclaim me, Adrian said, dispensing with pleasantries. I'm gathering evidence of their accords violations for the tribunal. I need your testimony. My testimony? Brennan laughed, sharp and bitter. And what makes you think I'd risk Corvus's wrath? Because they turned your sister against her will. Because they killed her when she refused to serve them. Because you've been waiting for someone to challenge them, but you're not powerful enough to do it alone. Through the bond, Margaret felt Adrian's calculated risk. This gambit could win them an ally or make them an enemy. Brennan's expression went cold. How do you know about Maeve? Because Corvus brags about their conquests. Because I have 200 years of watching them destroy everyone who defies them. Adrian's voice softened. I'm sorry about your sister, but I'm offering you a chance to make them answer for it. The Irish vampire was silent for a long moment. Then his eyes shifted to Margaret. And you? The human bonded to him? What's your stake in this war? He's mine, Margaret said it simply. And I protect what's mine. Brennan's smile was genuine this time. I like her. She's got fire. He turned back to Adrian. Fine, I'll testify. I'll tell House Vesper how Corvus turned Maeve. How they drained her when she tried to escape. How they threatened to do the same to me if I reported them. Relief flooded through the bond from Adrian. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Corvus has spies everywhere. By morning they'll know you were here. Brennan moved to a desk, pulling out paper. I'll write my testimony tonight. You leave at dawn. Well, you leave before dawn. Your human rides in daylight while you sleep in the carriage. Safer that way. They spent the night documenting Brennan's story, and Margaret saw a pattern emerging. House Corvus didn't just break the accords, they shattered them systematically, turning vampires without consent, feeding without permission, killing anyone who resisted. How many? She asked as dawn approached. How many vampires has Corvus destroyed? Hundreds, Brennan said quietly. Over the centuries. Maybe thousands. They're the reason the accords exist, to prevent houses like them from consuming everything. Margaret looked at Adrian. Then we're not just fighting for us. We're fighting for everyone they've hurt. Through the bond, she felt his love surge, his pride that she understood the stakes. They left Carlisle before sunrise, the carriage modified so Adrian could sleep safely in a sealed compartment during the day. Margaret rode in the passenger section, watching the Scottish countryside roll past, thinking about the tribunal ahead. Over the next 10 days, they visited 4 more vampire lords. Each had testimony. Each had lost someone to House Corvus's cruelty. Each agreed to come to Edinburgh and face Corvus publicly, but they also gathered enemies. Margaret felt it through the bond, Adrian's increasing tension, his awareness that they were being followed. Corvus knew what they were doing, knew they were building a case, and they wouldn't reach Edinburgh without a fight. The attack came on the 12th night, 50 miles from Edinburgh. 6 vampires ambushed their carriage on a lonely road, moving with coordinated precision. The driver was killed instantly, torn apart before he could react. The carriage tipped, sending Margaret sprawling. Adrian was out in seconds, placing himself between Margaret and the attackers. Through the bond, she felt his cold calculation. 6 opponents, 1 of him, a human to protect. The odds weren't good. Run, he said through the bond. Take the iron filings. Run and don't look back. No. Margaret grabbed a stake from the overturned luggage. We fight together, remember? 1 vampire lunged. Margaret scattered iron filings, and the creature screamed as they burned through his boots. Adrian used the distraction to decapitate another with a blade he'd concealed in his coat. 4 left. They fought in the darkness. Margaret providing what defense she could with iron and blessed silver, Adrian moving with lethal efficiency. Through the bond, she felt every hit he took, every moment he feared for her life. Then Cassia emerged from the shadows. Enough playing. She gestured, and the remaining vampires backed off. Lord Corvus sends his regards, Adrian. And his final offer, return willingly, and we let the human live. Refuse, and we make you watch while we destroy her slowly. Through the bond, Margaret felt Adrian's terror. his certainty that he couldn't protect her, that he'd failed. "No deal," Margaret said before he could respond. She pulled out the velvet pouch Mrs. Havisham had given her, the one she'd been saving. "Tell Lord Corvus that House Corvus is finished. We have testimony from 5 houses. We have evidence of Accords violations spanning centuries. And tomorrow, we present it all to House Vesper." She threw the entire pouch of iron filings. The explosion when it hit the ground was spectacular. Ravenmere's iron had been blessed, concentrated, turned into something more than metal. It created a barrier of fire that no vampire could cross. Cassia screamed, her perfect face blistering. "This isn't over!" "Yes," Adrian said, pulling Margaret close as the fire forced Corvus's vampires to retreat. "It is." They stood together, watching their enemies flee into the darkness. And through the bond, Margaret felt Adrian's wonder, his absolute certainty that she was the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to him. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "Tomorrow we end this." Together, Margaret agreed. They walked the last 50 miles to Edinburgh, arriving at House Vesper's stronghold as the sun set on their 14th night of travel. The tribunal waited, and Margaret and Adrian walked in together, broken things that had found completeness in each other, ready to face an ancient house and win their freedom once and for all.